Hello, my name is Chris Moore and my pronouns are he, him. I'm the Exhibits Projects Coordinator at the Museum of Pop Culture here in Seattle. And I'm also a steering committee member for the Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium. I have short brown hair, lots of tattoos, and I'm wearing a black shirt with leaves on it. Welcome everyone. We'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and that we occupy this land. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, but serves as a first step in honoring the land we are on. I would also like to thank our workshop funder, the Office of Arts and Culture, and our host, Northwest ADA Center, for hosting this workshop and providing interpreters. On this slide, the logo on the left side is for the Office of Arts and Culture. It is a blue capital A with an and symbol nestled inside a large letter C, and the words Office of Arts and Culture Seattle below it. On the right side is the Northwest ADA Center logo with red letters and ADA in white letters with a red background. Now I would like to introduce Elizabeth Ralston, Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium founder.
Hello, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to spend with us this morning. I hope you are staying well and safe during this time. I am Elizabeth Ralston, she, her pronouns. I have short black, gray hair and am wearing a burgundy top. I wanted to share with you about the work of the Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium, also known as SCAC. Our mission is connecting arts and cultural organizations with information and resources to improve accessibility for people of all abilities. We have three main goals: professional development and training workshops on accessibility, creating a website with resources soon to be revealed, and developing an equipment loan program where we hope to one day lend out equipment to arts organizations like assistive listening devices, flat screen TVs, audio descriptive equipment, and so on. But because of the pandemic, it's sort of on hold at the moment. We also provide technical assistance to nonprofits around accessibility planning. And you can find our past workshops on the YouTube channel that we have, and that will be pasted in the chat as well as our Facebook page. And we are fiscally sponsored by Sunpike. And Sunpike is on the right-hand side in a red with red words as the logo. So I would like to let you know that we work very hard to make these workshops financially accessible and also accessible for people of all abilities. The Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium asks that you consider making a donation to support our mission in future workshops. Together, we can increase accessibility, and we'll be posting the link in the chat box. We want to be able to continue to make information and resources available to arts and cultural organizations, and every donation goes a long way. So please take a moment to donate right now. Thank you for your support. So the goals of today's workshop, part one. Very excited to share with you some wonderful information. First, we're going to understand the difference between equity and equality. We're going to learn what roles these concepts play in the ADA. We will explore how intersectionality impacts a person with a disability's participation in arts and civic life. We're going to learn from these wonderful panelists about the impacts and implications of the ADA and their reflections on its 30-year history and evolution. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. And now I'm going to introduce Christiana Obey-Sumner, who will be our moderator for this session. Christiana is a Black and Indigenous, non-binary, and medically disabled person. They are the CEO of Epiphanies of Equity, a social equity consulting firm that particularly specializes in social change, intersectionality, anti-racism, and disability justice. For almost 2 decades, they have dedicated their life and career to amplifying the importance of social equity, particularly narrative identity development and its cultural humility and allyship, bringing awareness to lived experience of racialized ableism and external anti-Blackness, and dismantling the psychosocial paradigms that underlie social injustice and inaction. Christiana and our 4 panelists will turn the video and audio on now, and I will let you take it away. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy.
Sorry for the delay, everyone. We are having a slight technical difficulty, but we're going to get back at it in 1 second.
Hi, this is Elizabeth here. Sorry about the technical difficulties. While Christiana is waiting to come in, I would like to have each of the panelists introduce themselves while we're waiting to get the panel started. So why don't we have a quick 30-second, 1-minute introduction. Say your name, your pronouns, and who you are. So Trisha, let's start with you.
Since my typing. Hello, my name is Trisha Diamond. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a Black woman with dark skin. I'm wearing a silver Hausa headdress and a white blouse, and I have shoulder length Black hair, but you can't see it because it's under the headdress. Yeah, I guess I'll stop there. I can also identify based on my other identities. I am an adult woman with Asperger's, which is now autism spectrum disorder. I also have early onset macular degeneration.
Great. Let's go to Trisha York.
Hi there. I am Trisha York. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with a Black maxi dress and my hair pulled back. I am recently elected to the board of directors for the Tenants Union of Washington. I have been a spoken word artist for several decades and more recently gotten involved politically as well with food justice and transportation justice and housing justice as they relate to disability equity as well.
Thank you, Trisha. Let's go to Caitlin now.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Skilton. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the title holder of Miss Wheelchair Washington. Hence, I am wearing a black dress with white butterflies and a crown and sash. I'm also on Seattle's Disability Commission along with Christiana.
Great. Anna, let's go to you.
Hi, my name is Anna. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with long blonde hair, and I'm wearing a gray sweater and glasses. And I work in educational research, and that looks like working with philanthropic giving to local nonprofits, doing research about different programs that are happening for young people in the Seattle area, and then also working directly with youth in program development. And I'm a queer disabled woman, and I'm particularly passionate about helping disabled youth feel proud and excited to be a part of the disability community.
Fantastic. I think that's everyone. Is that everyone? Yeah, I think so. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I was just looking for my list of questions because I don't have them memorized. But why don't we go ahead and start by sharing, we're talking about the ADA and the 30th anniversary of the ADA, right? And we are talking about equity and equality and the implications that the ADA has had on that. So I would like to start there with the parsing out the two ways that equity and equality are different and what their influence on the ADA or vice versa has been. So who would like to start with that? You could raise your hand. Well, yes, go ahead, Anna. Thank you.
I think the ADA was a really important piece of legislation in making it clear that we, as disabled folks, at least deserved to be able to access spaces. But the idea that I think that the ADA falls heavily on equality and being like, we put a ramp on that building so you can access it just the same. And I think that an equity focus, hopefully moving at some point towards a justice focus on how the ADA can be read, looks more like, what would it mean for a disabled person to show up fully in this space? So not just to be able to get in the door, but to actually be able to fully participate and be a part of the community in this space, or in this, like in our national community and landscape.
Yeah. I also,
Yeah, Trisha.
so I believe like the difference between equality and equity in terms of ADA. So equality was like building the ramps, for example, or building the infrastructure, versus equity is about doing what's necessary to ensure that we can remain there and be successful. Yeah, so equality was about opening the door, but equity is more about ensuring that you can maintain your status there, as well as be successful, and acknowledging that you have as much to offer as, and they have much to receive from you as well. Because I think too often we're seen as human deficit models about, oh, we have to do all of this to ensure that you remain. But the ADA was also about acknowledging that we have gifts and things that are necessary to ensure that they're successful.
Thank you so much. It looks like Christiana is now in. I am so excited to see you. So I'm going to turn it right back over to you, since you're way more eloquent than I am. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I was having some technical difficulties. I kept coming in on the other side of things. And I think there's also another panelist that's trying to get into. It's so nice to see you all. I think y'all were just talking about like what the ADA, what is the ADA? Is that where y'all are at? Okay, awesome. I will introduce myself briefly and then we can continue. So, hello everyone. I'm Christiana Obi Sumner. I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. It's okay. We're in the shadow of Mercury retrograde. My pronouns are they, them. I do a whole bunch of things. Most specifically, I am a consultant and I am an activist and I do artistic social justice art. I just do things. To describe myself, I am a Black person. I have glasses and I am wearing primarily Black stripes. I also have a whole ton of books behind me, like an unnecessary obsessive amount. And so that is my background in more ways than one. So, hello everyone, that is my introduction. Thank you for having grace with me. The next question I had, did anyone get to share about what the American with Disabilities Act is and how that, and what it means for them?
I would like to share if that's possible. Hi there. So I like to talk in stories because a lot of my justice has been born out of inequity that I've experienced. And for me, there was been many situations where the assumption that equality exists or that equity exists is way more detrimental in this situation, just because, just as an example, I had a friend who was having trouble accessing a food bank recently because they had blocked off the access aisle and the ADA stalls to encourage social distancing, but didn't make any accommodation as far as being able to get groceries in the car, or even being acknowledged that someone with a disability who couldn't get out of their car might be impacted. And it got to a point where they actually called the local law enforcement. And the first law enforcement officer was great. happened again the next week that she tried to go. And I had almost an argument with that officer about the fact that this food bank was not actually putting groceries in the car. They didn't have anything in place that that would acknowledge that someone was there or needed assistance. And then there's this attitude overall, I think, in our communities that the people who need help will have it. And they see people with mobility challenges as, or our communities sometimes do, see people that have mobility challenges as someone who, like, not someone who would drive themselves, not someone who would do anything by themselves because they have deficits. And that's just simply not true. I'm a disabled driver, and I had to have a very long conversation and ended up telling this officer to brush up on his RCWs, because blocking an access aisle is still a $200 fine and an infraction, even if you're not blocking the actual ADA stall. And those types of situations in our society happen all the time, where someone who is experiencing poverty also may or may not have a disability, and their whole family might suffer, because most folks probably wouldn't have that conversation with an officer or an organization who are supposed to be serving people who have needs. It's probably a more eloquent way to put it, but I've experienced that myself in housing situations as well, where there is literally no way, unless you make a civil rights complaint to the city in Seattle, there's no way to get an apartment complex to actually bring their ADA stalls to code if they don't want to, because the Office of Inspection doesn't handle it for apartment complexes. And you actually have to out yourself as someone with a disability to be able to make a complaint. You can't, as a private citizen visiting a friend, make a complaint that will probably get followed up on. You have to actually actively be discriminated against for those changes to be made, or hire your own attorney.
Thank you so much for that, Trisha. I want to do two things. I think that is a great sort of like segue into the next question I'm going to prime us with, which is going to be talking a little bit about, like, what I'm hearing is ableism, and ableism perhaps both from this, the lens from equality versus equity. But before we get to jump into that juicy bit, I want to acknowledge that we have a new panelist with us, Andrea Patz. Andrea, I would like to ask if you would be willing to give yourself maybe a 30 to 60-second introduction, or like who you are, sort of your background, and just a brief pronouns and a brief physical sort of description for folks.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Andrea. I am a Latina young woman with dark hair that is shoulder length and wearing a dress with flowers on it. I am an MSW student at the University of Washington, and for me, I'm always really interested in advocacy and activism. I suffer, well, not suffer actually. I have ADHD and the combined type, and I, along with anxiety and other mental health issues, and I'm really happy to be here and hear everyone's different stories. I also work for the state for long-term care, so that will give you a view of how horrible things can be. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Trisha. So going back to that question, and like popcorn style, like, let's talk about, like, you know, how do you define ableism, or how have you experienced ableism? And you can share either from that space of like equality or equity. And like I said, I think I don't know if, like I said, I was trying to get in, but like I said, like making sure that folks share. You don't have to, share if you are just 2 to 3 minutes sort of things. But yes, okay. So how have you experienced ableism? How would you define that in, like I said, lenses of equity or equality?
I'd like to jump on that one. I've experienced ableism as well as racialized ableism. Part of the challenge, so I didn't mention what I did for work, and I'm like, oh my goodness. But so I've worked as an aerospace engineer, so I have a degree in aerospace engineering. I've also worked as a teacher, educational administrator, assistant principal, and I've also worked as an administrator, and I'm currently with King County as an administrator and program manager. And so ableism, I think employers go from a standard of what people can do, and once you, I would say, exert your right to utilize a ADA, then you need to start sharing specifically what your challenges are. My problem in particular is because I mentioned I have Asperger's, so I'm on the autism spectrum, and people have stereotypes of what someone on the spectrum looks like, particularly in Pacific Northwest. There's an assumption that you're male, you're a white male, and you're probably in the tech industry. And as I've listed, none of those industries are tech. So when I approach employers or places that I'm working, and I explain that, I'm on the spectrum, many of the symptoms that being on the spectrum are exhibited. Those are things that, like, I'm seen as not being social. So those are things that you are evaluated on during your evaluation. And meanwhile, there'll be entire departments or in human resources, they're set up to support people utilizing a ADA. And I remember one place I worked, the human resources representatives, it would be so much easier if you had something like that was physically wrong with you. I don't know what to do with you because you have these other things. And I'm like, really? And also, as I mentioned, I have macular degeneration, but I also have a heart condition. And that's another thing in the workplace with ableism, in terms of I have a disabled parking pass because of my heart. I would have coworkers not knowing, just walk, you're so lucky you get to park so close. And I'm like, yeah, I would prefer not to. Or what exactly is wrong with you that you can't? Or they would park behind me and like, oh, you can wait. I need to hurry up and get. So socially, as well as in terms of your evaluations, there's just this assumption of how you should behave. If you don't fit into that box, you feel as if you're bothering people by forcing them to adhere to the guidelines of ADA once you need. So there's been a lot of coaching on my part for them, telling them exactly what I need to be successful, versus I think it probably should be the other way around. If you're an organization, you should be prepared for the possibility that people have visible and invisible disabilities, and you tell, this is what we can offer you, versus, yeah, you have the autism. What do we do with you? Tell us what, and if you're just starting, like, I don't know what you need, you tell me. So yeah, I know that bounced all over, but yeah, it's a daily occurrence, daily. I wish I were a white man in tech, because then apparently it appears as if everyone knows what to do with you. Then I'm the wrong person. So.
Thank you, Tricia. Yeah, I'm hearing that the issue is that when people see things equally with disability, that they're not bringing in the intersectionality. That's the equity piece. How about other folks? What is ableism? How does equity and equality play a piece in that? I see Andrea's hand. Sorry.
That's okay. Hi again, and I just want to go next because I feel that I connect my piece to Trisha's. Trisha, is that good? I always mispronounce things. So I've experienced. I don't have autism or are part of the autism spectrum disorder, but I do have ADHD that is both, they basically say you cannot pay attention, or you're too hyperactive, and they call it a combined type. At my old job, one time my boss asked me, "Why do you have to say everything out loud before you do it?" And it took me back, and I was like, "Well, that's how my brain works." And then she told me, "Why should we all get to have to listen to that?" Um, but I think part of the thing that was the most ableist that I think I experienced in the workplace was I got FMLA. I'm not sure how many of you have to deal with FMLA, but it's a horrible nightmare. And I was having FMLA because I was being harassed by a social worker at Harborview. And the thing was that I managed to get family FMLA because through a technicality, and I don't think they're too happy about that. And I'm willing to admit that was for anxiety. And then when my boss, within our job classifications, could fire me. So, and then I was like, "What about my FMLA?" And she's like, "That makes me more hesitant to hire you." Obviously, that was a thing that she shouldn't have said and could get her in trouble. But again, and then as Trisha was talking about housing, also too, dividing so many of these offices, I would have to go through the equal opportunity employment office, and they're really mean, and it's really hard. I can't go through the 88 because of it, and a lot of it has to do with precedented cases, and I'm so sorry if it took a little too long.
No worries. And just so for folks are wondering, FMLA stands for the Family Medical Leave Act. Andrea, would you like to just quickly define like how that showed up for you?
Yeah, so that showed up for me in that I felt I was treated differently. Um, and I've had friends too that their productivity or their evaluations is not always measured by how their quality of their work, but by simple things like grammar and or writing too fast and or little mistakes that. And I think that also for me in equity and equality is that I think a lot of women of color, especially who have um, neurodivergency experiences a lot. I hear a lot this from my other friends. And again, so Trisha said, they know what to do if you're a man in tech, because there is a stereotype that those are the people who would have something like that. And again, too, people say ADHD is overdiagnosed, but people, especially children of color, are just kind of being like, "You're bad," and then start the cycle of um, start putting the cycle of like detention and like youth jail. And I think all of that is connected. um, and yeah, FMLA is Family and Leave Act, which is what it helps you be able to kind of schedule it, how to make your schedule a little bit different, but it's you have to meet certain requirements, and it's interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those just like the ADA, one of those fun policies that we have to navigate to get our needs met. Before we move on to the next question, I don't know, if Caitlin or Anna or Trisha, if any of y'all have any.
Yeah, so with sorry, almost lost my train of thought for a second. Growing up, I think one of the biggest things was uh, accommodations with education. Um, and with that came employment. One of I was discriminated against and not allowed to participate in my school's driver's ed program, which was really, really obnoxious, and I did not like that at all. And I mean, I could go on with the various different, scenarios with I had an IEP because of my nonverbal learning disorder, which is oftentimes compared to ADHD in the way that it presents itself. So with other people, I just say ADHD because I feel like people are closer to understanding that than they are to understanding nonverbal learning disorder. So yeah, I had an IEP that was not always obeyed, and it was very difficult learning how to advocate for myself and make sure that my needs were met in an educational standpoint. And I think that just kind of transferred over into adulthood with accommodations for jobs. I went to interviews over and over and over again where I felt that I walk into the room and I look into the interviewer's face and I just instantly know that I am going to be wasting the next hour of my life, that I am not going to get this job because of that discrimination. That even though it is now illegal to discriminate against somebody for a disability, and especially in that context, but it's still difficult to implement and enforce that. And so that's kind of one of the things that I'm really struggling with right now, while I'm in between jobs, is job discrimination, and going back into that while I'm going back into the process of interviewing and all of that stuff. So
Thank you for that.
Hey there. I'd like to share I'm just briefly on medical ableism. I am also a dialysis patient, and a lot of times I think folks think that if you're eloquent and well spoken, that if you have a situation with a lot of anxiety, that you're faking it or being dramatic. And I've seen racialized ableism in medical facilities as well, as far as kidney transplant with some of my friends, and getting the care that they need. And just to piggyback on the point about enforcement, like, we're only as good as our enforcement. And right now, at least for parking situations, it's up to each local municipality to enforce the ADA as far as parking stalls are concerned. And most cities like Seattle are so focused on the new construction permitting that there just isn't any way to enforce not only the parking enforcement. I mean, it's one thing to have someone park illegally in a spot for just a second, but it's an entirely different thing if your medical facility doesn't have a van accessible stall so that people in power chairs can get their medical care. And so, again, just to make the point that we're only as good as our enforcement, and there's just, even if we have the laws there, unless you have an attorney who's willing to take the case, and then it's really up to your city in most situations to enforce that. And what a lot of folks don't understand in the able community is that it literally does cost lives. People get injured when they're trying to exit their vehicle, and those are situations where people might become further disabled because they're just trying to meet their own needs.
Thank you for that, Trisha. I'm going to say that we have a 5-minute warning before a quick break, so I wanted to check in with you, Anna, and not to call you out, just to say that everyone else has shared in this question. So if you had any last thoughts, and then I'll prime us for our break.
Sounds great. I think that ableism just assumes that everyone is able to do the same things and in the same ways. And I think that as a like young person with invisible disabilities, I have rarely been in spaces that have assumed anything other than able-bodiedness. And it shouldn't feel special or like a treat to be able to show up fully in a space, but it does when someone's like, hey, like, do you want to do this thing? What are your access needs around that? Like, will you be able to come? I think so much of the time it's an afterthought to make sure that needs are met. And when it's an afterthought, you can't meet them fully. So yeah, I think that that's the way that I would like contextualize ableism within my life, and then like kind of figuring out how and when to use energy to counteract that, because it's a lot of energy to do all the time, as I'm sure that all of y'all have also experienced, and things that I heard in your answers is like, we shouldn't have to make the systems like Trisha and Andrea were saying to like allow us to show up in spaces. They should already be existing for and everyone has needs. It's just that many people's needs are met by the way that the system is currently, but definitely not in many other forms of oppression. Also, I guess many white men who are cis and straight have their needs met and who are able-bodied. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. So I'm going to prime us for the question we're going to talk about when we come back from the 2-minute break, which is we're going to talk about the ADA and what it has done to bring equality or equity, if you can find that, in the last 30 years. And so really, really quick, there was a conversation, there's a question about what the ADA is as a quick definer. Long and short of it, 60-second encapsulation. When the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, it did not include a lot of different sort of communities of people. And one of those communities of people were disabled folks or people with disabilities. There was some gains, like especially in the late 70s, in terms of say like access to certain spaces or access to certain educational opportunities, but it wasn't really comprehensive. So it wasn't until 1990 that the ADA, or the Americans with Disabilities Act, was passed as a policy with all of that entails, right? People who had access to things like legal services or political structures who could actually make the, create precedent cases that led to the ADA in the 1990 were really the people who were the most centered in what it meant for that policy to come on board. In the early 2000s, there was a sort of a rewriting or an addition, really, of broadening the definition of what disability is to include some folks who may not have been included in the past, and to try to make it a little bit more equitable. However, there are some of these other sort of like structural, historical, intersectional pieces that people are talking about here when it is disability and race, gender, sexual orientation, class, size, that when that comes in, then things start to break down. So the second part of this panel in a week or two, in early August, I think it's August, I'm so sorry, I think it's August 3rd. But in a week or two, we're going to be talking about disability justice, which is the framework of the organizing framework that came out of saying, hey, the ADA isn't doing the things that we need to do. But August 6th or something. But what we're talking about today is the ADA, and on the 29th, it's going to be the 30th anniversary. So when we come back from our 2-minute break, we're going to get down into the nitty gritty around what has the ADA done for us lately in the last 30 years, and eventually like where are we going to go in the next 30 years. So let's take a 2-minute break. You're going to see a little thing on your screen. Take a potty break, check your cell phone, do what you need to do, and then I'll see you in 2 minutes. All right, all right, all right, all right. As people start to come back into the space, like I said, I'm going to restate some of this question around the ADA, and when we talk about like what has it done for us in terms of equality or equity. I'm also going to share a little bit about the difference between equity and equality really, really quick. Equality is essentially trying to seek parity, or making sure that everyone has their needs met by doing the exact same thing for everyone. Equity, and this is a really low barrier example. This is a huge nuance. This is 30-second encapsulation. Equity is acknowledging that if at the end of it, if your ends are that everyone has their needs met based on meeting people where they're at, then the means towards that end will have to be varied. Strategies will have to take into accountability the different sort of experiences people have in their lives, and you have to rise to that challenge. So, you think about, say, the stimulus checks. Everyone who say, if you're a single person, everyone who's a single person, I think it was up to like $75,000 a year, got $1,200. The difference between someone who says makes $7,500 a year, say an SSI, and someone who makes $75,000 a year is going to have $1,200 means very, very different things. And that's an equality model. So you see that may not work, but perhaps if we had the pot of money that $1,200 came out of, and had something that was more scaled, that would consider perhaps the area median income of the person receiving the money, the household income, the sort of income that they receive, the level of network impoverishment they may have based on intersectionality or lived experiences, then everyone would get the amount of money that they need to get to, say, the parity point, which might be make sure everyone can pay their rent, or everyone can afford medication, or everyone has food or survival supplies. So those are sort of the differences between equity and equality, is those situations where everyone is supposed to be treated the same, versus situations in which everyone is trying to get to a place where they can all experience life the same. So with the ADA being passed, it is in a way that it was supposed to be, so people with disabilities or disabled people can have equal access to space, to education, to jobs, to public spaces like parks, that they have to be accessible. And what I didn't share, I have a multiply disabled, but I think that the disabilities that strike some fear into my heart as a Black person of size who is femme presenting, is that I use an assistive device when I walk, sometimes a cane, sometimes a wheelchair, and I'm neurodivergent, both developmentally disabled as an autistic person and with some psychiatric disabilities. My fear is, let's say I become overwhelmed in the space. I'm in a park, it's supposed to be accessible. I can't get my wheelchair through the grass. I start to become overstimulated and have a meltdown. Now, my grandma used to say you could tell that something is inequitable if you change a part of the situation, you don't think it would happen the same. So there's a piece of me that thinks, well, if I say I was a white woman in a wheelchair, a white person in a wheelchair that was cursing the grass for getting me stuck, would people come to help me? Versus what I would expect would happen with me, which is that people would call the police, and then I might get shot. So when I'm asking about equity and equality, I'm asking about those situations where, in that case, someone would like, oh no, I would treat anyone in that situation. If anyone was screaming in their wheelchair in the middle of the grass, I would call the police. Or do I need to take different approaches based on the person who was screaming in the grass and that situation of how I will respond? So, putting out some of those definitions for folks who are sort of asking in the chat about, some clear definitions of equity, equality, and the ADA. So I'm going to turn it back over to y'all, the panelists, after that brief sort of rundown, and ask the question again. It's going to be 30 years anniversary in a week of the ADA. I want to ask both, again, from the lens of equality and equity, what has the ADA done for us in the disabled community? And what do we need in the next 30 years in terms of perhaps policy change or access around the Americans with Disabilities Act that can help with some of these things?
I know for me, one of the awesome things is that um, especially in the arts community, there are a lot of places that are starting to have conversations, even if they're not bringing it to fruition because of money or otherwise, but making not just their space as an audience member accessible, but also their stages. And until more recently, I think Theater Off Jackson is one of very few places, and even that location has has challenges, but it's been one of the very few places that, as a performer, I can even have the ability to go and perform. I know that there are a couple of other places that are looking to make their spaces accessible, but it's a lot of money to build a ramp in a lot of areas, and nonprofits don't necessarily have that kind of funds. They're struggling enough with accommodating their participants with their access needs. But Seattle is one of the few places that I think has kind of started to shine a light on that. And that's one of the ways that I've definitely seen help. The ADA also has, it's provided a conversation point for me with city officials when I really do everything to try and make sure that places understand what their responsibilities are, even though it's not legally my responsibility, to advise someone or an organization or a place of business what their obligations are. But I've been able to not as frequently as I'd like, but I've been able to have conversations with city code inspectors to say, this is what the code is, and it's not being enforced. It's a pretty cut and dry situation, and like I said, not as frequently as I'd like, but it at least provides the conversation point where they then can start to help enforce some of those situations. Like, there's been 4 different medical office buildings that I've had to do that with, where the proprietors of the business just simply refused to make their parking lots accessible. And it's not just that, it's restrooms and so many other ways as well. And that doesn't even get into providing access needs for mental health challenges or things like that. That's like the bare minimum. That's the physical disabilities that we do have laws for. So much of our laws are not, and depending on what location it is, like apartment complexes have different rights and or responsibilities than maybe a restaurant. And fair housing laws definitely are not enough as far as the ADA is concerned. And the ADA, in a lot of ways, doesn't protect tenants in the ways that they protect someone going to a place of business. But there have, as far as the ADA and the actual cut and dry laws are concerned, it's helped as far as providing a point for me to start to say, no, this is what the actual law says is your obligation, and you're not meeting it.
Thank you so much for that. I think you also bring up a good point too, with like sort of physical access. A lot of the folks on this call, because of our generous sponsors, are going to be in the arts or arts leaders. And so I know several of you on this call are artists. And so I really appreciate you bringing up sort of access to art spaces as well. I see Trisha, you have unmuted, and you're definitely one of the artists. I would love to also hear too, like where have we come from? Where do we need to go, and especially like in your experiences?
I wanted to address one of the questions that's in the chat, and the
Sure.
other question, and that
We
will
will have Q&A, but we
okay.
can't.
But because you had asked like the difference between, what the ADA has done. So I'm looking around, I'm probably the oldest person here, and I remember what the world was like before ADA, although it's important to acknowledge there's some progress, but of course that more needs to be done. I know, particularly in our family, there are people that pursued the arts specifically for the reason that they weren't able to continue their education because of their disabilities. Like my aunt, she lost her vision at 3 years old, and for her, this is before ADA, they decided to just stop sending her to school because they thought you're a girl and you're blind. So the males that lost their vision, they gave them instruments, and well, you'll be able to make a living because you can play an instrument. So, and not developing them otherwise. So only thing, this is like your one purpose. And it's like, well, this is your one purpose for being alive. You're going to play music. And not allowing them to develop the rest of their abilities. I think since ADA is here, we're allowed to develop and be fully functioning. But yeah, and I also wanted to mention that, of course, because Department of Justice is responsible for the administration of ADA, I'll say it's as good as the DOJ is. So yeah, we have to be cognizant of that. I know that was all over the place. Ooh. But
I appreciate.
You're right. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, I appreciate you sharing that too about your history. It is not my story to tell, but I'm just gonna say this. Like, not only is Trisha an artist, but Trisha is like music royalty from like New Orleans. So like, I feel like there's a whole like panel that Trisha could just
domino all those. I can see we're probably all a little unique. That's why we gravitated to arts as well. So that's why I also look at, when we have disabilities, I just wish that people would see more of what we have to offer versus the, oh no, what do I have to do to accommodate you? I was like, well, not only are we your customers and constituents, but we also have a lot to offer. So look at what we have to offer versus, oh gosh, I've got to have how many parking spaces? I got to put a ramp, So yeah, we have things to offer.
Thank you. I also, I know that Elizabeth is probably going to tell me it's almost time for Q&A, but I wanted to continue really quick with this conversation around like acknowledging like where we are and where we need to go in the last 30 years, we need to go in the next 30 years. I also wanted to like welcome back Caitlin, that again, tech issues. But like opening it up, I think like to like Andrea or Anna, I know Caitlin, you're like Miss Wheelchair Washington too. So like, I feel like that's also like an art form. I shared with Caitlin how I used to be in pageants as well. And I feel like there is a whole art form to that. So, but like also like,
definitely is.
There's a whole art form for that. But yeah, anyone who would like to share in these sort of spaces, and then we will have a question. This as a process, we'll have a question that will lead us into some of those Q&A questions are coming up, and then we'll start to have that Q&A as well.
So I really want to go kind of still touch on like ADA and just really quick on the art. And I was doing a lot of research about it. Also, it's interesting if you ever have the chance to look at the precedent cases, because sometimes people will settle, and that's not their fault, but most of the time, sometimes the people being sued will try to settle, so it doesn't establish a precedent. And someone also asked in the chat and about disability, and I don't know if people know formally. Their name is now Birch Russin, but they are an artist, active in the community, and I think I like this a lot when I feel within the ADA and living in the society that you have to produce to make capital. Otherwise, you're not an artist, or you're not a good artist, or you're not doing the right art. You're not a writer if you're not writing all the time. You're not. So just do. I think causes a lot of imposter syndrome and sometimes a lot, at least for me, self-hatred. So I always look and try to do affirmative. Also, if you ever do a scene, there is a free font called thank you, Anna. Open Dialectic, and it is to help people have it more accessible. I think for me, the ADA, I still don't know much of the history. I think it changed a lot of things. I was also around that time. There was also a push for more changes in the FDA releasing medicine for HIV, and I guess for me it showed like that maybe we could work more together and unified within disability justice, because I think there's a lot of amendments to do. And as Trisha said, if someone else is doing the enforcing and that other enforcing it's already at another entity that is not really reliable, that makes it worse. We have to go through all these different entities to get what we need versus having a single one, which I think would make it more, I don't know, accessible.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I was just gonna see you next.
Great. I think that it's important when we're thinking about the ADA and what it is to also understand what it says. And so the ADA says that businesses and places that receive, now I'm worried that I'm confused, but places and organizations need to provide reasonable accommodations. But the disabled folks don't get to decide what reasonable means, the organization gets to. So when I was in college, I was an RA, so I was being paid in room and board. And I, thank you for that language, Andrea. They say covered entities. So don't fully know what that means, but I was being paid in room and board, and then suddenly developed one of my illnesses. I can become allergic to anything at any time, and became allergic to a lot of different things, and suddenly couldn't eat in the dining hall. And they decided that a reasonable accommodation would be that they would make me plain chicken and green beans and rice every day for dinner and lunch. And I would pick it up at 5 p.m. and not be able to eat with any of my friends and have to eat in a special place in the dining hall, which is what they considered a reasonable accommodation. It's not creative. It doesn't really acknowledge my personhood as a person who likes to eat and likes to cook food and likes to eat delicious food, that food is a huge part of community and being able to be in community with other people. And so that shows up across so many ways that the ADA is enforced and given, is that able-bodied and non-disabled people are well, this seems reasonable to me, so it's reasonable, and doesn't acknowledge the creativity and resilience that comes from being in a disabled community. Ask any disabled person and they have a lot of creative workarounds for how they're moving through the world. Maybe don't ask, but I promise they have them. And I think that that's a big part of what I would like to see changing in the next 30 years, that it's not just this venue is ADA accessible, which kind of means nothing. And then you arrive and you're like, I have multiple chemical sensitivities. So people are wearing perfume and I actually it has a ramp, but I actually can't stay. I would like to see it be that the disabled folks are figuring out creative strategies for access and being paid for that labor.
Thank you, Anna. And that, that leads us kind of into the sort of final wind down of the Q&A portion. And so, when I look at the Q&A in the chat, I'm kind of seeing essentially a through point to lead us into that Q&A portion for some of the more nuanced questions. But I'm seeing a through point essentially of what can organizations or individuals or even governments or systems do to start to put some recommendations or suggest, what are some recommendations or suggestions in place for these people to do this so they could be more accessible, or that they could be allies or accomplices to disabled folks or people with disabilities, how they can make sure they can protect the funding during this time, what can they do to make sure that they are being as aware as possible to be as accessible, especially in the arts. So That will be my last question for you, and then we can go, there's going to be some specific questions that you see in the Q&A, but I see that through point, so we might be able to answer some questions with that through point, and then, we will start to ask some of those Q&A questions.
I would just say to do with us and do for us. That one little word always bothers me because as an organization, we should be part of the questions. We should be part of the inception, the program development. Don't ask us afterwards, what can we do for you? Like, we have voices and minds. We would like to work with you. Don't act like you're doing these things for us. That's one little word drives me nuts. And I don't know if it's the autism or whatever, but do with, not for.
Leadership of most impacted. That's what I'm hearing. Caitlin, I see you.
I agree with that 100%. And I would also just add to that, ask and listen. And don't just listen to respond. Listen to hear and really understand what I'm saying and what I'm asking of you. And because I think, we see multiple times in our lives as people with disabilities, times where people are just like, yes, I'm listening. But it's to respond and not really they don't really care, and you can't get anywhere with that. And so that's what I would say to that.
I'd also add, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I see you unmuted.
I'd also add to not expect a cookie when you do have a bit of creativity in your response. If you go above what the ADA stipulates, understand the ADA is the bare minimum, and there's so many disabilities that aren't accommodated. And they aren't accommodated in places where you would think that that most organizations would have an understanding. One of the most awesome successes, and I considered this actually a treat. I went to Maidenbauer, and they had scent pumped in their air freshener in the whole place so badly that I got a migraine and started vomiting before the show even started. And I emailed them and I explained the situation. I disclosed my disability, and they changed the policy. They invited me back for free for a or complimentary ticket to replace the ones we'd purchased for a show that I actually was more interested in, and they stopped doing it, and I totally enjoyed the show. I still had to wear my N95 mask because lots of folks do wear perfume, but I was able to distance myself from them well enough that it didn't affect me. And I now am confident, because they did change it, that I can go back to that location and patronize them. And so, yeah, that's another way. Just work with us, hear us, and expect that you have that obligation as an organization where you're financially able to seek out the resources, and to not take so much energy as someone with disabilities to be polite, to be eloquent, to apologize where you don't really, where you're really not obligated to, but to get your needs met, you have to acknowledge that someone is going beyond what they think they're obligated to do. It takes so much energy to do that. So if you can take that out of the picture and do your part by just hearing what our individual needs are, I think that would go a long way.
Thank you.
And there's a lot of resources out there too. Like, I know Christiana's got a lot of webinars that are free that are out there, and even just contacting her to say, hey, what can we do as an organization? What's online that's free? There are tons of free resources out there on how to do that better.
Thank you, Tricia. And like I said, these are all still out there. I see another through point in the question and answer section, which is essentially, okay, so these are ways that people can be allies, but also how can, you know, perhaps in these larger sort of systems or institutions or power, can you have folks be seen, especially at that intersection, disabled folks as folks to be in board, to be in leadership positions, especially if they have invisible disabilities, and how, you know, that can impact things. How do y'all feel about that? Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel really strongly about that also because of healthcare, and I've been talking to you about it, but this idea that what could people do more? Every time I bring up, so I have sensory issues. I know maybe a lot of you might, but the mask requirement is very, very hard for me, and I understand why people react negatively. And but every time I bring it up, people just assume that I want their grandmother to die, rather than not only me, but thinking about the fact that there's so many people who will not have that access of getting a mask, or even the access of being able to afford a mask, you know. And like, it's just really difficult, and I guess I would just want people that, especially within disability justice, to realize to be more open-minded, more active, more understanding of why certain things, even if they don't make sense to you, it makes sense to a lot of us. It's very important to a lot of us. 2 years ago, this was me in the straw ban. um, Also, another policy, as I mentioned, I think Seattle has a lot of policy, and I think that's why as more leadership within positions of power, but also back up by the other community, and knowing that when we say something, to just not discount it immediately as something that is like too out there. Nothing is too out there. Well, the accommodations are not special treatment. If it is, well, whatever, because we need our special needs net and healthcare, because my glasses are breaking and I cannot see without my glasses. And I'm on Medicaid. You can't, glasses are not covered. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Is there any other folks who have suggestions on how to amplify the leadership of those most impacted, especially, you know, or the voices of community, especially to folks with systems and leadership of power, especially for folks at the intersections or with invisible disabilities, when that seems to kind of be deprioritized when folks think about the ADA?
One of the things that I personally really want to push for, either as a commissioner or as Miss Wheelchair Washington, is committees. I want to see a disability committee in every city. I think that it's such an incredible resource. It is so helpful.
I think Caitlin is frozen. That's okay. As Caitlin comes back, we can. Oh, there goes.
City or state. Oh, I'm losing connection.
You froze a little bit, Caitlin.
Okay. So what was the last thing that was heard? Do we know?
Perhaps like a quick encapsulation of what you said.
Okay. So basically, I would like to see more commissions in more cities. I think that as time has gone on, attending the committee for I think about a year and a half now, I've really found that it's a great resource. It's a great way to get individual voices heard and more diverse voices, and it's just, yeah, just a great resource, and I'm really enjoying having that opportunity there.
Thank you, Caitlin.
I'll just to add, I'd like to also see more coaching. So that's the way to have more people with disabilities, and intersectional and disabled, or coaching of people, because they need to be coached into or mentored into leadership roles. So people, regardless of your identity, if you could mentor someone to become a leader, that would help, because I think too often we're looked at, okay, I'll just go to you for a solution and then present that solution as their own. Try to mentor us to become leaders if you see that your organization does not really reflect a lot of diversity in terms of disabled identities.
Thank you. And Anna, I saw you sharing that.
I was just going to add really quickly that you're going to have to slow down. That like capitalism and ableism and all of those intersecting systems of oppression want us to move really quickly, and there's this big sense of urgency. That article about like white supremacy culture, urgency is one of the pillars of that. And so recognizing that needs will change all the time, and you might not be able to get everyone in the same room, but it's worth like continuing to try and continuing to meet people where they're at and meet their access needs. I'm going to put it in the chat, but there's a great article by Leah Lakshmi Pyapshna Samara Sinha called "To Survive the Trumpocalypse, We Need Wild Disability Justice Streams." And I think it describes what a truly accessible space would look like, which I don't think that many non-disabled folks have ever really imagined. Is beyond like there are people who use different assistive devices there. It really looks, it moves a little slower and it looks really different. So I'm going to link that in the chat.
Thank you, Anna. And in the last 4 minutes, I'm going to go to Trisha real quick, because there's one question I think we can all ask, but I want to start with you because we kind of have a backspace. And so I know Trisha is just dying to answer this question, but there's a question in the Q&A specifically around how we can make virtual events more accessible, and any examples of ableism that you've seen online or virtual events that you could share. So let's start with Trisha, and then anyone else, like, please, like, let's finish strong with this one.
So this, for example, is a really good model of what it should look like for an online event, taking in consideration there are people, of course, with visual challenges, hearing challenges, and ensuring that everyone is represented. Like I said, I've taught dance classes online, and when I do that, I actually prefer those to now in person, because if there are people that in like a private chat when they come in, find out if they have any sensory things going on, if they want to show their screen, if they don't, if there are modifications that you need, and you can speak to them directly versus just being lost in a large class and just going from the assumption that everyone is doing something in the way that someone that does not have challenges. I've also found it another benefit is that even in terms of like, for example, for my disability, for several employers, it was very difficult for teleworking. So, and magically now, oh yeah, teleworking's a possibility, versus that was one of the list of options. And when I would go and I'd like to tell her, oh no, you can't telework because that's just too much. But now suddenly it's okay. So I think this, unfortunately, one ramification of COVID, it's now opened the possibility for all of us to be able to attend events, creating the accommodations, as well as to be able to work with accommodations, because now we find out it is possible to telework, amazingly. But this is a good example.
Thank you, Trisha. We have like 1 minute and 30 seconds. Anyone else have any last burning questions on how to make virtual events accessible, or anything you didn't get to share so far? What I can share is that what can be really accessible, and what I think can help in a lot of the sort of other questions. What do you do? How do you be an ally? What does this mean? They're going to have a second series that's going to be talking about disability justice. There is an amazing series of essays that have come out through Alice Wong and Andrea Levant around ADA 30 in color, where Black, Indigenous people of color have written about their experiences around ableism and disability. And so I really suggest that, as well as we go to the next conversation around disability justice, Skin, Tooth, and Bone, which is the Disability Justice Primer by Sins Invalid, is also a great resource to kind of some of the questions that's remaining in the chat. How do you create a committee? How can you be more accessible? How can you be an ally? What does that look like? Those are some of the resources. So as we are here, I would like to really thank the panelists for their time today, for sharing these things. I will reach out to you if y'all are open to any of the folks here sharing or reaching out to you with more questions. If that is something, we will check in with you and hopefully work with the hosts to share that information. And I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm going to share my screen again. Let's see. I have to figure out how to make it on a big slide. So I want to thank everybody for their time and participation today. We're going to share the recorded video. Oops. This PowerPoint is driving me nuts, but you know, that's the way it goes, right? So these tech problems, but we managed to do okay, didn't we? So we will share the recorded video and resources on our YouTube channel. Please contact us with any questions or comments, seattlecac@gmail.com, and we'll put that in the chat. We would love your feedback. We really want to improve our workshops and improve the material. So we would love your feedback, and that survey will be emailed to you. Again, your support is appreciated. And the donation link will be put in the chat. Thank you for considering. And I wanted to say that our next workshop is also on Thursday, August 6th at 10 a.m. PST. So please be sure to sign up on the Eventbrite invitation, which is posted in the chat, hopefully. And I also would like to say that please go ahead and like us on Facebook and follow us and see what we're up to, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And again, I want to thank all our panelists for an amazing conversation and enlightening all of us with these pearls of wisdom. And especially thank you to Christiana for an amazing moderation experience. And I also want to thank all my steering committee members for helping out with this workshop. It really takes a village, it really takes a team to pull this off. And I want to thank Mel again for hosting at the Northwest ADA Center. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful day and stay safe. Bye-bye.